And a pleasant good evening to everyone. This evening, my opening remarks will focus on the health and travel protocols for the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. Just by way of background, I want to add that tourism is the main economic driver for the Federation. Our borders reopened last Saturday, October 31st, to international travelers and tourists. As a federation, our aim is to reopen safely with minimum risk of reintroduction of the virus to the federation. We have confirmed a robust set of protocols to ensure safety for our frontline workers and safety for our inbound travelers and tourists. Between Saturday and present, 40 inbound passengers, 40 outbound passengers, and a total of 29 chartered flights have been processed at our two airports, 38 in St. Kitts and 42 in Nevis. In essence, we've utilized the past 4 days to test the systems that we have in place. What are our health and travel protocols? All inbound passengers or travelers to the Federation will be classified as having significant or high risk of exposure to the virus. You may ask, what are the pre-arrival requirements for all travelers via air or sea? All inbound travelers to the Federation will be required to log on to the COVID-19 national website, www.knatravelform.kn, before traveling. The traveler is expected to complete and submit the customs, border, and health entry form with required details, including evidence of a negative COVID-19 PCR test. This test must be done within 3 days of travel. For example, if you're traveling on Saturday, we advise that by Wednesday morning, you find an accredited lab, get your sample taken, and your test processed. The test must be done at an accredited laboratory in the traveler's host country. Now, travelers en route to St. Kitts include returning nationals, residents, work permit holders, tourists. What are the requirements for tourists and international travelers? Travelers in this category will be required to complete the entry form, as I mentioned. They are also required to submit a negative PCR COVID-19 result. The test should have been done within 3 days of travel. The inbound traveler must submit confirmation of hotel reservation at either of the following hotels: Park Hyatt, Four Seasons in Nevis, the St. Kitts Marriott Resort, or Marriott St. Kitts Vacation Beach Club, Royal St. Kitts Hotel, the Koi Resort, or Paradise Beach in Nevis. It's important each traveler must submit confirmation of hotel reservation in order for your form or for you to be given approval to come into our federation. The traveler will be required to undergo focused health screening at the airport and will be asked to download and install the St. Kitts and Nevis COVID-19 mobile app XMAP. If the tourist is asymptomatic, that is without symptoms, without COVID-like symptoms, he or she will be allowed to enter the federation. The inbound traveler or tourist will then be vacationing in place at their hotel with access to an approved package of services for the first 14 days or for the duration of stay if shorter. The international tourist will be required to do serial testing. That is, he or she will be tested on day 7 and on day 14 if still in the federation. If the test on day 7 is negative, The tourist can be allowed only through the hotel's concierge or tour desk, and by appointment only. They will be allowed access to COVID-19 approved tourist attraction sites on the island in a secure bubble. All inbound travelers must receive a PCR test on day 14 of stay. And once the result is negative, the tourist will be allowed to integrate into the society. If vacation period is less than 14 days, the tourist may depart the Federation having completed an exit COVID-19 PCR test which is negative. Please note, tourists and international travelers can only use COVID-19 certified ground transport with appropriate petitions to move between the airport and the hotel and the various tourist attraction sites. What are the requirements for returning nationals and residents or work permit holders? Travelers in this category must also undergo focused health screening at our airports. Nationals who are returning to the Federation and who are free of COVID-19 have the option to stay at the following accommodations. You can stay at the Oali Beach Resort Hotel in Nevis if you're a national. If you're a national, you can also stay at Potworks in Nevis and Paradise Beach. If you are returning national, you can stay at the Ocean Terrace Inn in St. Kitts. You can also stay at the Royal St. Kitts Hotel in St. Kitts. Returning nationals can also opt to stay at any of the 4 franchise hotels, namely the Four Seasons Resort in Nevis, the St. Kitts Marriott Resort Hotel, and Marriott St. Kitts Vacation Beach Club, Park Hyatt, and the Koi Resort in St. Kitts. Nationals and residents may also opt for pre-approved quarantine and pay for security facility. Interested returning nationals or residents may access the pre-approved option by visiting the following website: www.covid19.gov.kn, www.covid19.gov.kn. Returning nationals will not be allowed the self-quarantine option in their homes unless they employ at their expense the services of private security. In other words, we are not allowing individuals to quarantine at home without security, without the security facility. What are the requirements for in-transit passengers at either of our 2 airports? In-transit passengers are also expected to show their COVID-19 PCR test result. They are expected to wear a face mask while at our airports. In-transit passengers must also undergo focused health screen at our airports. In-transit passengers will not be permitted to leave the airport after clearance by immigration, customs, and port health officials. You may ask, what happens to an inbound passenger who exhibits symptoms or COVID-like symptoms? Such an individual would be channeled to the testing booth in the isolation unit at either of the airports, where a nasopharyngeal swab will be extracted and sent to the local lab for processing. The symptomatic traveler will then be evaluated, triaged in the isolation unit, and await transfer. Who will be tested upon arrival? All travelers are required to present a negative PCR test to enter the Federation. Such tests, as we've said before, must be done within 72 hours of travel. The test must be done at a reputable accredited lab. In other words, we are trying to prevent the submission of fake or fraudulent PCR test results. If the health authorities have reasons to suspect that the laboratory is questionable or the test is outdated, fabricated, or inadequate, you will be required to be tested upon arrival. Inbound travelers who are exhibiting COVID-19 symptoms will also be tested upon arrival. Diplomats and inbound travelers with special needs. Specific travelers with non-standard circumstances to be addressed are advised to contact the St. Kitts Nevis COVID-19 Task Force via email. In other words, send an email to COVID-19 Task Force at gov.kn at least 5 days prior to travel to the Federation so as to have your requests considered for approval. Specific travelers include diplomats, persons with medical conditions warranting special considerations, and persons with a disability or traveling with persons with disabilities. Flight crew. Flight crew are required to submit their crew COVID-19 status card as prescribed by the International Civil Aviation Organization and undergo focused health screening, including temperature check at the health screening unit at the airports. Flight crew must wear face masks while in the Federation. Flight crew who are involved in flights with layover can only stay at one of the following accommodations: Royal St. Kitts Hotel, Park Hyatt, St. Kitts Marriott Resort, Marriott St. Kitts Vacation Beach Club, Four Seasons, or the Koi Resort. Flight crew who are part of layover flights can only stay in place at the above stated accommodations. They can only access services on the hotel property and can only leave the hotel en route to the airports for departure from the Federation. What are the requirements if an inbound traveler enters the Federation via our seaports? Inbound travelers entering the Federation via sea vessel will also be required to complete the entry form. The vessel will be required to dock at one of the following 6 ports. Submit the Maritime Declaration of Health to the Port Health Officer and interact with the other border agencies. The 6 ports of entry include the Deepwater Port, Port Zante, Christophe Harbour, New Guinea, Charlestown Pier, Long Point Pier. Inbound travelers who arrive via sea vessel will be processed accordingly and will vacation in place or quarantine in place as outlined already. The prescribed quarantine time will be determined by the vessel's or the ship's transit time between the last port of call and date of arrival into the Federation. The transit time must be supported by official documentation and the Sail Clear advance notification system. Yachts and pleasure vessels that are over 60 feet must quarantine at Christophe Harbour in St. Kitts. Yachts and pleasure vessels that are less than 60 feet must quarantine at the following sites: Ballast Bay in St. Kitts, Pinnis Beach, and Gallows in Nevis. There is a fee that will be charged to monitor yachts and pleasure vessels that are less than 60 feet that are in quarantine. If you are applying or submitting an entry form to enter St. Kitts and Nevis, how would you ascertain approval? Inbound travelers will only be granted permission to enter the Federation if the following criteria are met. The traveler must submit a negative COVID-19 PCR test result. The traveler must submit reservation for appropriate accommodation as per the protocols. The traveler must also submit consent forms and the end user licensing agreement for the St. Kitts and Nevis COVID-19 mobile app. Ladies and gentlemen, we are doing our part to reopen our borders safely. However, each of us have a role to play in preventing the transmission of the virus and keeping our island safe. We have a responsibility to prevent the spread of the virus by adhering to the prevention and control measures that we've been explaining over the past 7 months. Let us continue to follow the science, work together to fight the COVID-19 pandemic, and rebuild our economy. Thank you.